The prime minister today defending comments he made in the wake of former Cuban President Fidel Castro's death. Many say Justin Trudeau's remarks were not tough enough. Today, Trudeau responded to the criticism at the close of the Francophonie summit in Madagascar.
Do you think Fidel Castro was a dictator?
Yes.
And your statement yesterday reflected that?
The fact is, Fidel Castro had a deep and lasting impact on the Cuban people. He certainly was a polarizing figure, and there certainly were significant concerns around human rights. That's something that I'm open about and that I've highlighted. But on the passing of his death, I expressed a statement that highlighted the deep connection between the people of Canada and the people of Cuba. And at the same time, Canadians know that I always talk about human rights, including here yesterday, including with Raul Castro 2 weeks ago, including wherever I go around the world. I believe in positive, constructive engagement in the world, and that means being open and direct in our assessments, in our challenges, in our points of disagreement, while at the same time being consistent with the kind of respect that Canadians expect from their Prime Minister.
All right, for a reaction on this, let's bring in Michael Geoghegan, a political analyst. He joins us now from Victoria, BC. Michael, were you put off at all by the PM's remarks? Was it a gaffe?
I think it went a little overboard in terms of the amount of warmth it expressed. Obviously, there's a personal as well as historic connection in terms of the Trudeaus and Castros, but I suspect if he had a do-over, he would have toned down some of the warmth of the statement.
All right, so should he go to the funeral?
Well, Trudeau, it's an interesting situation because Castro was actually a pallbearer at Pierre Trudeau's funeral in Montreal. So I think there's certainly an expectation that he would go. Now, however, because of this controversy, and the Conservatives are certainly demanding that he not go, that's going to make things more awkward. And also for Trudeau, what he has to calculate in, there's business opportunities for Canadian businesses. Canadian tourists, a lot of us like to go to Cuba specifically because the beaches aren't full of Americans. And so it's a situation where he has to balance that off with, look, we got an incoming hardline Republican president. Do we really want to antagonize him like this? So there's a lot of factors going into that equation.
Yeah, I want to talk about the possible alienation of the relationship between America and Canada. But I want to take a step back and ask you about protocol for a funeral or a service for a dictator. I mean, generally speaking, what should one do?
Again, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, you've certainly had situations when there were, American or Western-backed dictators, and when they passed away, they had either, they certainly had former presidents attending their funerals, and then of course there's other dictators where, basically the well wishes from the United States were quite scathing. So it really depends, but there's certainly been no hard and fast rule of, this person was sufficiently democratic, so therefore we're going to send our prime minister or president to attend it. It's been a real mixed bag in terms of how different leaders have been treated over the years, and quite frankly, it's boiled down to more, were they a useful ally, or were they in a sense an enemy of the United States or of the Western world?
All right, so let's talk about then the American-Canadian relationship, because as you say, we've got a new president coming in January who's been very critical, of course, of Cuba, but at the same time has had business interests there. So how do you walk that fine line?
Well, that is going to be interesting. I'm glad you brought it up. And it's also worth bringing up because, of course, the Conservatives have been very much hammering Trudeau on this issue. But the other factor to bring up is that the original resistance to embargoing Cuba came from the Diefenbaker government. It was the Conservative government. Even at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and, we were potentially on the brink of thermonuclear war. It was a situation where it was the Diefenbaker government that refused to follow the U.S. lead in terms of economic sanctions against Cuba. So in a sense, constructive engagement has been a nonpartisan issue. But of course, in the United States, you have so many Cuban exiles, a lot of them living in Florida. So that's why you've had people like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and others, vociferously condemning Trudeau's statements because they're playing to that, very powerful Cuban exile group.
Yeah, they're supporters, especially from Marco Rubio in Florida, of course. Michael Geoghegan, we've got to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.